Welcome to part 3 of our conditional loops lesson. I'm going to teach you a second version of a conditional loop. It's called a while loop because it only uses the while keyword. Uh, let's take a look first at the do while loop. This is what a do while loop looks like. It has the keyword do, curly bracket, codes to repeat go inside that curly bracket. We close off the brackets, and then we end with this while keyword, and you'll see that the Boolean expression, which is the loop condition, is at the end, after all the code to repeat has run at least one time. Okay, so let's take a look at this while loop now. The while loop sometimes is a little bit safer because you can see here that it begins with the keyword while, and the Boolean expression is at the start before any of the code to repeat is actually run. So this code might run a section of code or a code block 0 times, because if this Boolean expression is false, it skips the entire code block. Only if it's true will it actually run the code in here. So there are cases when you're programming when you want the code to run at least one time, and there are times when you want the code to be skipped if there's no errors or something like that. We're going to do an example now to see how to write a while loop. It's going to be quite similar actually to our loop example number 1, but I'm going to add a little bit of a twist to it because we're going to use the key down event for the form and a state variable so that we can exit the loop while it's running, so it doesn't have to reach 9,999. Now, to be honest, this example could be done with a do while loop or a while loop, and I'm just sort of throwing in this loop to work with this while loop. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump into my code. I'm going to create a new project, and it's going to be a Windows Form application as well. Still on my USB key, but I'm just going to call this one loop example 2. And then I'm going to press OK to start up my project. It's going to look very similar to what we did previously. So just like in our previous example, I'm going to add 2 labels, LBL start and LBL counter. So for the LBL start text, I'm going to right click here to count from 1 to 9,999. Press any key to stop. So I'm just going to add a little bit something extra there. I'm going to rename my label to be LBL start, and I'm going to add change the name of my second label to LBL counter. Now this time I'm just decided that I'm going to leave the text. You might decide that's a little bit too messy and you'll remove it. So I want to program this click event over here. So I'm going to double click my LBL start label. Creates this new subprogram, this new code block for us, and here I'm going to write very similar code. I'm going to create a counter variable that's used to count from 1 to 9,999, and so that's int counter. I'm going to initialize it to equal 1. And here I'm going to write my while loop. Now, the while loop starts with the word while, and I want my loop to run while counter is less than or equal to 9,999. Code's going to be very similar. I'm going to print it out to my LBL counter label. So that's LBL counter.text equals counter.toString. Print out my variable. Since it's an integer variable, I got to convert it to a string before it can be printed out in my label. After it gets printed out, I'd like to increase it by 1. So counter equals counter plus 1. You know what? Let me just run it like this and take a look. So here it is. Click here to count from 1 to 9,999. When I click here, I want you to take a look at this label too and see what happens. You'll see there it turns into label. And then it jumps to 9,999. So there you can see the freezing actually happen. So to prevent it from freezing, I'm going to add that application.doEvents line of code at the bottom of my loop. So now I run it. Oops, wrong label. And there we go. We can see it. You can see how slow it is actually counting up to 9,999 compared to when there was no application.doEvents. So application.doEvents, it forces the screen to, or the form to repaint itself after every single count, and that actually slows down the program a fair bit. So if you don't want the user to actually see the counting, then it's pretty beneficial to actually let it freeze, I guess. You could always have a message saying something like please wait, and let it count up to 9,999 really quickly. Or in this example, I want the user to actually see the counting, so put it in. So we've pretty much done the while loop. It's pretty short, but we have that extra little wrinkle that we'd like to do, we'd like to add in. We want to add a key down event to the form and a state variable called keep running. Since I'm already in the code view, I'd like to add this Boolean variable, this Boolean state variable. I'm going to describe it as set to true to keep counting, or false to stop counting. So bool keep running. I'd like it to not be counting at the start, so let's set it to false to start off. And so there's our state variable, and now what I'd like to do is add it into my loop counter. So while counter is less than or equal to 9,909 and keep running equals true. Got a bit of documentation here. Count up from 1 to 9,999. Allow the user to stop the counting if they press any key. Okay, so I'm going to leave a little bit of a bug in my code right there. We'll get to it shortly. The next step would be to add this key down event to the form. So to add the key down event, remember to click once on your form. Click on the little lightning bolt, the little events button in your properties window. If you don't see the properties window, by the way, just go to view properties window and it'll sort of pop up for you. Now the event that I want to program here is the key down event. So here it is. I'm just going to double click on that little white space beside it. If the user presses any key, I'd like to set keep running to equal false, and that should kick my loop out. So I'm just going to say stop the loop if it is running. So there's my code. I'm going to try and run it. Click on this button and nothing's happening. I'm actually clicking like a mile a minute here and nothing's going. So there's a slight little bug. So if we take a look here at our loop condition, remember that the loop condition has to be true in order for the loop to start running its code block. So if we take a look at the start of our subprogram here, we see that the counter is equal to 1. Counter is equal to 1. Okay, that's good, because 1 is less than 9,000, less than or equal to 9,999. So the first part of the loop condition is true, but you'll see that the second part, keep running equals true, that may or may not be true. So if you take a look at keep running, we'll see here at the start of our program, when we first declared keep running, we set it equal to false. Well, false is not equal to true. So this part of our loop condition is causing us a problem. What we can do to fix that is when we click on LBL start, in addition to creating our counter variable and setting it equal to 1, I'd also like to set keep running to equal true. Okay, so here's a slightly more complicated loop condition, and all parts of the loop condition have to be true with this because of this AND statement. So by setting counter to equal 1 and keep running to equal true, I will make sure that my loop condition is true so that my loop can start running. So add that into your program and then press start. And so here we are. When I click on it, oh, there it goes. And when I press the space bar or any other key, I guess, stops. Okay, so good. That's what I'd like it to do. I'm going to press this and it resets. Okay, so I've got it working. Um, let's just say I didn't want this to reset. What if I want to stop it, and then when I click on it, it continues on from where I was counting from. So there's one thing that we can do, one little thing actually, that we have to do to fix that, and that is to just change the location of where we declared our counter variable. So right now, every time we click on LBL start, our counter variable gets created and it gets set to a value of 1. If I want my counter to keep its value, what I'll do is I'll declare my variable up at the top of the program underneath public partial class form1 and above public form1. And so now, since my variable is declared outside of my subprogram, it will be able to keep its value even if the subprogram sort of stops. So let's run the code here. I press start, click on it, press the key, stops at 2344, press it again, and there you'll see it continuing. Okay, stop it, continue, stop. Okay, and so here I am starting it, stopping it, starting it, stopping it, and you'll see that it continues on until it reaches 9,999, in which case everything sort of ends. So that's the end of this part of the conditional loops lesson, example number 2. I'm going to be starting example number 3, which is actually a slightly more complicated lesson. It's going to use a timing mechanism so that the loop only runs at a time that I specify.